Hello, I'm Rebekah Roth. There's a slight chance you may have heard of me. I've become the foremost authority on everything 9/11. If you've never heard of me, you may be asking yourself, how did she become the authority for anything? That answer is very simple. I was a flight attendant for a major airline for more than 30 years. I spent most of my weekends flying to Asia, and for much of that time I was the purser on the flight, which means I was the lead flight attendant. I was in charge for making sure everything on the flight in the cabin ran smoothly. If any problems arose, I became responsible, from reassigning seats to performing CPR on a passenger who had a heart attack at 35,000 feet. I retired from the airline a few years after 9/11. Like most everyone else, I bought into the story the government told the world about what occurred that morning. Nevertheless, something never sat right with me. As a flight attendant, I knew the kind of hijack training every flight attendant in the industry learned and reviewed every single year in recurrent training. However, not one flight attendant on any of the 4 planes followed the protocols they were taught to follow in the event of a hijacking. Now, I can perhaps understand if the flight attendants on one plane messed up and didn't follow protocols, but not the flight attendants on 4 planes making that mistake all on the same morning. Those hijack procedures are literally drilled into us every single year. There are code words to be used to inform the pilots about what's going on in the cabin. The pilots then have squawk codes they use to inform the air traffic controllers that they are being hijacked. None of that happened. I wanted to know why, which led me to question what really was going on that morning. Now that I was retired, I had a lot of time to investigate. And that's exactly what I did. The more I dug into 9/11, the clearer it became that perhaps the planes didn't do what the government said they did. The most telling factor was I knew a cell phone didn't work at altitude. We flight attendants all purchased cell phones when they became available in the late 90s. Of course, we wanted to see if they worked on the airplane. Early on, cell phones had trouble working inside a jet, even while parked at a gate, just because we were in an aluminum tube. In time, reception improved on the ground, but it always failed at about 1,800 feet after takeoff. Since flight attendants all had different carriers, it was fun to see whose carrier was the best signal. Sadly, none of them did. Even today, 30 years since cell phones were new, they haven't improved their reception in flight. I have a flight attendant friend who periodically tries that same test nowadays with the exact same result. If a plane is equipped with Wi-Fi, that is a different story. No airplane was equipped with Wi-Fi in 2001. That means the planes had to be on the ground, and preferably the caller had to be out of the plane to make a cell phone call. How is that possible? I knew that an airplane full of fuel would need to make a heavy landing, which required at least a 10,000-foot runway. I also knew that the cell phone call on the first flight, American Flight 11, began about 20 minutes from the time it took off from the Boston Logan Airport. I searched for a sufficiently long runway that close to Boston. I found one at a reserve military base in Massachusetts. That might have solved the issue for Flight 11, but what about the other 3 airplanes that day? I researched the time all of those airplanes took off and how long it would take them to land at that reserve base. To my utter surprise, shock, and horror, I discovered that in every case, the cell phone calls on each of those flights began at the same time it would take to fly from their departing airports to that reserve base. That was just the beginning of my journey. That shocking discovery created even more questions. I began to consume any and all information I could find on 9/11. As I did, it became apparent that I had to write all the material I found in some kind of an organized fashion to keep it all straight. That gave me the bright idea to compile all that information into a book to supply answers to questions others might have. This was around 2012, when many people who questioned the official government story about 9/11 were labeled as conspiracy theorists and targeted for abuse. It seemed prudent to be somewhat esoteric, so I collected all my findings into a novel. That's how my first book, Methodical Illusion, was created and published. Since I was unknown, I thought only a handful of people would ever read it. As word of the book became talked about on social media, people who always had questions about 9/11 invited me onto their podcasts. Eventually, a major overnight radio program contacted me for a 2-hour interview. Apparently, every insomniac in the United States was listening. By morning, my book sales exploded. Within 48 hours, the book shot up to number 9 of all books sold on Amazon. I also autographed and shipped thousands of copies. More important than the books being sold was the fact that it awakened numerous people who were aware that something wasn't right, but because it didn't align with the government account of 9/11, they had no place to reveal what they knew or saw. After my radio interview, I became the repository for their information. People contacted me about the reserve base I had discovered. One woman provided her phone number. Her account of what she experienced was so compelling, I called her. Because what she saw was so unusual, it stuck with her, yet it didn't fit into the government story of 9/11, so she didn't give it much credence until she heard me on the radio. Then it made perfect sense. She lived right by that reserve Air Force base I had mentioned. On the morning of 9/11, she had an appointment. As she left the house, she saw a commercial airliner flying so low overhead that she could read the airline name on the fuselage and see passengers through the windows. She was afraid the plane was going to crash. When she finished her appointment, she was certain she would hear of a disaster that occurred in her neighborhood. To her surprise, the disaster she heard about was the Twin Towers being struck in New York City. Because she heard me say the plane had to be on the ground to make phone calls, she knew that United plane she saw was landing at Westover, a name I had not mentioned in the interview. If you ever questioned the government story about 9/11 and knew you weren't being told the truth, then my books were written just for you. Imagine how shocked I was after appearing on Coast to Coast AM to find airline employees and other people who had pertinent information about 9/11 that needed to be exposed. So I incorporated all their revelations into my 5 books. You can buy all my books on Amazon in soft or hardback editions or Kindle. If, however, you'd like a personalized and autographed copy of any or all my books, you can go to readroth.com and it will direct you to my online bookstore where the books are available in both hard and soft editions. A collection of all 5 books is 20% cheaper than on Amazon, with free shipping on any order to anywhere in the United States.